Today we're going to be looking at how to perform an IPv6 infrastructure audit. If you've read articles, books, or any type of IPv6 deployment guideline, there is always an emphasis on auditing your infrastructure to determine IPv6 support. That is, before you deploy IPv6. Why is it important to audit, you may ask? I'm going to provide you the answer in a short while on why we need to do infrastructure audits. But information on how you actually do the audits is usually not clear. And that's why we are here to help. So today we're going to be looking at 4 steps that you need to follow in order to do an IPv6 infrastructure audit. And then I'll also show you some tools, some of which we've created, and some online resources you can use to audit devices in your infrastructure. So let's go ahead and begin. Our agenda will be to look at the why. So why do we need to audit? And when should you do it? We'll then look at a step-by-step guide on how to audit and some useful resources which will give you clarity on whether devices are IPv6 ready or not. Then I will also demonstrate how you can perform an audit using a simple tool that we created. So stick around for that. Then finally, I will take questions, and always feel free to ask questions using the Q&A as Stefan demonstrated, and use the chat for any other issues. I usually say that we can learn something from each other. Maybe you've done an audit, you started deploying IPv6, you encountered a legacy device, it hindered the progress of your IPv6 deployment. So it's good for us to share. So it's not all about me just talking, it's about us sharing ideas, and hopefully it will be interactive. The first thing that we like to do, Stefan mentioned the Menti. I like to know, based on your perspective, why do we need to audit our network infrastructure before deploying IPv6? So let's head to menti.com, then use the code 769727. That is if you're already not there, menti.com. I can see some guys already answering. So I have 3 people who've responded. Why do we need to audit our network infrastructure before deploying IPv6? 5 people. Only 6 out of 48 of us. So why do you think we need to audit? So someone says that we need to audit to ensure all systems are ready for deployment. That's true. We need to audit to perform an IPv6 infrastructure audit. That's funny. We need to audit to know the requirements and come up with a budget. That's good. To know if the network is IPv6 compatible, to understand what equipment we have and what level of IPv6 support it has, verify capability, to keep track of your network and upgrade accordingly. So I can see the responses are quite good. Depends on what we call audit and infrastructure. Are the equipments V6 ready? Is there any inconvenient filtering? Are the routes correctly propagated? So in this webinar, we'll just be looking at the infrastructure audit. So do the devices in your network support IPv6? Another comment here is to ensure that we plan for devices that do not speak IPv6. So I can see based on the comments that we have an idea on why we need to audit. So it makes sense that it is not feasible, or it's not a wise idea to dive in and start deploying before doing an audit, right? And why is this? Because smart engineers don't fly blind. Before you start your IPv6 deployment, you need to know if your devices and software actually support IPv6. And some of us, we've mentioned this in the previous Menti that we did. So we've shared all this. So you don't want to be in the middle of your IPv6 deployment only to realize that a certain device or devices do not support IPv6 and need replacement. And we've actually seen this happening. So some guys start IPv6 deployment, and then at some point they hit a snag. A device cannot support IPv6. Remember, if a device does not support IPv6, it needs to be replaced. Budgets, etc., etc. It can also be software, right? Billing systems. We've seen this with billing systems. The experience that we had was an ISP who had mobile LTE clients, and the billing system did not support IPv6. So they hit a snag at that point because you can't bill the clients for traffic. So to explore this further, why we need to do the audit. So I have another poll. So don't get tired of the polls. We'll make you be busy in this webinar. So this question is, which of these will auditing help with? So we just like to know, based on you, which of these will auditing help with? Then let me just share the items. So which of these will auditing help with? So does it help with to accurately determine deployment costs, cut down on deployment time, reduce the risk of legacy devices, or all the above? So according to your perspective, which of these do you think auditing will help with? So I have 15 guys, 16 guys, 17. So currently it's a tug of war between accurately determining deployment costs and all the above. So thank you very much for participating. We'll move on. So all the above is quite right. And in the first poll that we took, most of us mentioned some of these things, why we need to audit. So it will help us to accurately determine deployment costs. You don't want to be in the middle of your IPv6 deployment. That's when you realize that you need to change some devices. So it will also help us to cut down on the deployment time. If you hit a wall while you're trying to deploy, it means that your deployment will take longer than it was intended. Then also it reduces the risk of legacy devices as you're deploying. So thank you very much for participating. So we had 32 people. Thank you very much. So having looked at why we need to audit, when do you think we need to audit? You've looked at the why. When do we need to audit? And the answer is as early as possible, or as soon as possible. So if you look at my screen, you can be able to see sort of like a deployment timeline from project initiation to IPv6 being deployed. So you need to do your audit as early as possible. In between you starting your project and IPv6 being deployed, whether it's your milestone is getting IPv6 to your customers, you'll have various steps, right? And for example, you will need to advertise your prefix, you need to enable IPv6 in the core, you need to enable IPv6 at the customer edge. So you have a lot of steps. So doing an audit early enough enables you to avoid surprises and hence prevent stalling your IPv6 deployment project. You also want to know the relevant costs, which we've just looked at from the poll we took, involved. So the relevant costs involved in order to replace devices and software. So we've looked at why we need to audit and when you need to audit, right? let us go ahead and look at how we actually audit. And we have an interesting character here. How many of us know this character? So for the ones who read Batman movies, read Batman comics and watch the movies, you definitely know the character, right? So this character is called Two-Face. And the character basically portrays the concept of duality and the conflict between good and evil. So what does this mean? When a vendor says that a device is IPv6 ready, it doesn't mean much, right? So just the mere fact that a device is labeled as IPv6 ready, it doesn't mean that you should trust that, right? Just because you can configure an address on a device, an IPv6 address on a device, doesn't make that doesn't make that device IPv6 ready. So vendors will always claim IPv6 support. That's the good side on your left, while critical features are not yet supported, right? And we all know in terms of deployment, you'll be looking at critical features that you are running. So whatever you're doing in IPv4, you need the same features in IPv6. So for example, if you're running an MPLS, if you run MPLS in the core of your network, and the vendor states that the devices are IPv6 ready, and IPv6 addresses can be configured on them, if the provider edge routers do not support the 6PE or 6VPE features, then you have a problem. So always determine IPv6 support at the feature level and don't rely on the vendor support claims. So remember, what needs to be audited ranges from servers, routers, hosts, and even critical softwares like billing system. But for this webinar, we're just focusing on critical infrastructure. So what are the steps that you need to follow to successfully do an audit? So we've looked at the why, then we've looked at the when. So how do you, what are the steps that you need to follow in order for you to audit, or the how? The first thing that you need to do is list all the devices in your network, categorized by type. So is the device a host, a router, a switch, firewall, etc., server? So list all the devices. Also, for each of these devices, we need to know the operating systems and versions that they're running. We'll see this, why this is important in upcoming steps. Next, you need to determine the features needed, right? Most of the time, at the bare minimum, the device should be able to support core IPv6 protocols and also IPv6 equivalents of what you're currently running in IPv4. If you run BGP for IPv4 on a router, then you most definitely need BGP support for IPv6. If you run OSPF currently for IPv4, then you definitely need support for OSPF v3 in IPv6. After listing the devices and their features, the next thing is to research the feature support, right? Are the features that I listed supported on the device that I'm auditing? For this step, you can use datasheets or online platforms which vendors provide. I'll be showing you some of this later on. Finally, based on whether a feature is supported or not, you will have several outcomes, right? So that is, the device is IPv6 ready. You need to make a decision. The device is IPv6 ready based on feature support. The device needs upgrades, software or hardware, or the device does not support IPv6 at all, and the only way out is replacing it. So basically, these are the 4 steps that you need to follow in order to conduct a successful IPv6 infrastructure audit. So I have another Menti for you, another poll for you. Of these 4 steps that we've looked at, of these steps, Which step do you find most challenging? Of these steps that we've listed, the 4 steps, which step do you find most challenging? So let me switch to menti.com. Menti.com, then the code is 769727 for those who are joining us. Menti.com. So I have 10 people, 12 people. 20. We are 51 of us. So I'll take 2 more and then we can move on. Which audit step do you find most challenging? Thank you very much. So looking at this, it's quite interesting, right? And thank you also for the ones who said it's not a challenge for me. That's good. Looking at the two, at the center, the 2 bars, determining required features and also researching feature support. And listing the devices is the least challenging of all this, right? So looking at determining the required features, yes, it's understandable because if you're running IPv4, you might not be sure of which features do I need in IPv6. Of course, apart from the features that you're currently running or what you're currently running in your network. So most of the guys we've worked with are not sure because IPv6 might be new to them. So determining the required features might be a challenge. But researching the feature support, which is the highest actually, we've seen this the most challenging in that people don't know where to find information on whether a device supports IPv6 or not. So don't worry, we're going to be looking at all these steps one by one and how to actually do them. So thank you very much for participating. It really helps us. So this leads us to the tools and resources which will help us in simplifying the audit process. So while we're still in menti.com, I have another poll. And this time it's related to, remember we talked of the 4 steps. So I'm going to show you the resources and tools for each of the steps. We identified the steps. Now we're going to look at each of the steps, what needs to actually be done and what are the resources that you need. So head over to menti.com. It will be interesting to know where do you get your list of devices? So the devices that you need to audit, how do you get them or where do you get them from? So go to menti.com, then the code is 769727. Menti.com 769727. So from the spreadsheet, NMS, network diagram, asset list, Excel sheets from colleagues. That's great. We have 8 people who've responded. Anything that's new, if there's anything that's not highlighted here, we'd like to know. From network monitoring, the network diagram, network documentation, device list, the IT register risk, from the inventory, the topology. Yeah, so all this should be pretty much in the same line. From network diagrams, device scanners and spreadsheets, NMS. Yes, so this is pretty much correct. Thank you very much for participating. Looking at where to get the list of devices. You'll get the list of devices from the NMS, as we mentioned, your network diagrams. You can also get the list of devices if you want to, from scanning. This is from the perspective of client devices. You can do active scanning or DHCP profiling. But for the core of your network, most of the time you'll be able, you already know, you have a network diagram, you have an NMS, which will be able to give you a list of the network devices that you need to audit. So after getting the list of devices, so you have your list of devices in your network that you want to audit. The next step will be to determine the required features. Remember, these are still the 4 steps. Step number 1, get the list of devices. How do you do it? We've listed that. We've mentioned that. Next is how to determine the required features. So the best place to get information about various internet protocols, as we might be aware, is from RFCs. But there are thousands of RFCs, and determining which mandatory features the device should support based on an RFC can be quite challenging. So that's why we have this document, the RIPE 554 document, which lists the requirements for IPv6 in ICT equipment. Basically, it just provides the guidelines based on types of devices, for example, hosts, routers, firewalls, and what features must be supported for the device to be IPv6 compliant. Then also optional, you'll have mandatory features and optional features. Optional features are listed in the document, may not be present on the device, but the device will work properly as long as those features are not required in the network. So the RIPE 554 document, the requirements for IPv6 in ICT equipment, I'll share the links later on, but something worth mentioning about the RIPE 554 is because it's entirely based on RFCs. So for a device to have basic IPv6 support, it should support a minimum set of RFCs. So you need to ensure that you are looking at the current or the up-to-date RFCs, because the RFCs are usually improved, right? So for example, the IPv6 RFC was 2460. Now it's an internet standard 8200. So you need to keep that in mind whenever you're working with RFCs. Then some of the requirements are also based on the National Institute of Standards, or the US government IPv6 profile developed by the US government. Then your devices don't need to support all the features listed in the document, right? So as long as you are looking at the features that you currently run in your network, the others don't matter. If you don't run ISIS presently, it just means that you need to look at the features or the protocols that you are running currently in your network. So after determining the features, the next thing is to research on feature support. You've identified the IPv6 features that are needed for that specific device. The third step is to determine whether the device supports the features required. So I will say there are 3 main sources for this information. The first source is the IPv6 Ready program, and I'll be showing you this later on in a short while. And basically in the IPv6 program, IPv6 Ready logo program, they test IPv6 support on devices based on various conditions. So they have labs where they do tests, and they also do device interoperability tests. So for example, a certain client can operate properly connected to a certain type of switch, and more. I will demonstrate it later on. Other than that, vendors have platforms on which their devices and operating system versions are listed. And for each of these, you can be able to tell which IPv6 features are supported. You can also get information on feature support from datasheets and other documentation. Finally, you need to decide. So after doing all that, you've listed the devices, you've determined the required features on those devices, then you've researched the feature support. You need to compile a list of mandatory features that are needed, then evaluate them and make a decision. So the final outcome will be, is the device IPv6 ready? Do we need to do a software or hardware upgrade, or both software and hardware? Or do we need to completely replace that device? So this is the fourth step. You need to make a decision on that. So even if you're not deploying IPv6 now, and I wonder why you'll not be doing it, right? But I would still recommend that you do an audit of your infrastructure. And any new equipment that is purchased should be IPv6 ready based on the guidelines that we have just looked at. So if you're talking to your vendors, you give them the relevant RFCs that you need your equipment to support based on the various documents that we've mentioned. So far we've looked at the steps needed to be done in order to successfully do an audit. But you may ask, what are the tools that we can actually use to simplify this process? So we created an IPv6 audit assistant to make this process simpler, and I'm going to walk you through it. So basically it's a Google spreadsheet. The first thing that you need to do, I'll be sharing this later on. The first thing that you need to do is to make a copy of this document. So just click on File, then make a copy. You'll be able to have access to it, because right now you can't do any modifications the way it is. So make a copy of it. So in this column, we have the procedure of how to do an audit, but I'll walk you through it. So the first thing is we have useful websites that you can use as you're auditing. So the first one is, I'll just go through them quickly. The comparison of IPv6 support in operating systems. So this is from Wikipedia. So it just lists, let me increase the size. So basically it looks at IPv6 support based on operating systems. You should be looking at the green, right? So is it Windows, Mac OS, what level of support? And this will impact decisions on various technologies that you'll be, or various solutions you'll be deploying, IPv6 solutions that you'll be deploying. So if the IPv6 operating system, if the operating system does not support RDNS-S, the recursive DNS resolvers, whereby you're just sending DNS information using router advertisements. So it means that you need to find another way of providing DNS information. It can't work. But for major operating systems, so if you look at Windows, did not support that up to Windows 8, 8.1, and the early versions of Windows 10, but the Windows 10 creator updates supports that. So this is one of the sources where you can look for IPv6 support in operating systems. The next one is the Cisco Feature Navigator. I'll be coming back to this later on in a short while in a worked example. Then Juniper also have their own a feature explorer, whereby you can browse features based on software releases or products, routing, switching, etc., security, etc. Then MikroTik also have the router OS IPv6 support page, which you can use. They've listed what is supported in router OS. And starting from version, it applies from version 5 and above. So you can be able to see what is supported at the moment in MikroTik router OS. Then we also have the IPv6 ready logo. I mentioned this earlier on. So the IPv6 ready logo program, basically they research on devices support for IPv6, and they do it in a lab and test various scenarios. So at least at a bare minimum, you'll know that a device supports core protocols or any other protocol that you're interested in. But mainly I'll say for this website, any device that you see here, you'll be certain that it supports core IPv6 protocols. So if you want to search your, let's say Cisco is a vendor. And then you'll be able to see all the various Cisco products. If it's the iOS XE and the relevant version. And you'll definitely know that this device supports core IPv6 protocols. If you're interested to look at the website, how they do it, maybe if you're skeptical, you can be able to look at, let me just show you quickly. When you go to resources, you'll have detailed documentation on how they do their tests and also the interoperability tests. The other tool you can use for Huawei, they have the Huawei feature query tool. If you have Huawei devices in your network, then it's the same. You'll select a product, is it the NE series, then you choose the series, the exact series, is it NE40 or NE08E? Then you select the model, for example, then the version. Once you do that, you will have the various specific features for that product. And you can go ahead and look at IPv6 support. You can come here and search for IPv6 under navigation. And you'll be able to see it supports dual stack, IPv6 over IPv4 tunnel, DNS, GRE, policy-based routing. So they have quite a number of features. So also in the instructions, we've listed the RFCs, core RFCs, in case you want to go deeper and look at the relevant RFCs needed for core protocol support, IPsec. So we have all the RFCs in there. So let me go ahead and look at our definition sheet. So remember, you'll be using this tool to audit. We've looked at the useful links you can use. Next, we'll look at the definitions. So the definitions, basically, this is where you list various items. So first of all is we have the device type. And you'll see how I'm using the definition sheet in the audit worksheet when I'm doing the actual audit. So for example, we have types of devices, and then this type of, all these type of devices listed here are not conclusive. You can add more devices on this list. Then we have features. So when you're talking of a host should support, you should be able to do manual configuration on that host. You should be able to do stateless address auto configuration. You should be able to support DHCPv6 as a client and various features. A router. So we categorize some common features, which will say are common to routers: BGP, OSPF v3, ISIS, and these features, your device should not, or it's not mandatory for your device to support all these features. It will depend on what you're currently doing in your network. So if you're not doing ISIS, there's no need for you to worry about ISIS. Then we also have features for devices that you can categorize as router edge. So examples, the BRAS and the likes, where you interconnect your customers. So we have PPO-PoE, IPoE, Radius, DHCPv6, QoS, DHCP guide, and the rest. If it's a CPE, what features should it support? Should be able to configure router advertisement options that will be sent. Router advertisement should be sent to devices behind the CPE, or the clients behind the CPE. Should be able to be a DHCPv6 PD client and support various transition mechanisms. For example, 464 XLAT. And again, as I mentioned, this will depend on what you currently plan to do or what you're currently doing. And then we also have a section here on conclusion. I'll be showing you an example in a short while. So is the device IPv6 ready? Do we need an hardware upgrade? Do we need software upgrade? Or IPv6 is not possible? Then operating systems, various OSs, you can add more. It's not conclusive. Then where is that device? Is it at the edge, WAN, core, distribution, etc.? Then you can go ahead and modify the location here. Currently, we just have city 1, 2, 3. You can modify it according to your actual network. So we have another sheet here with the network diagram. You can insert your network diagram. Then in the audit worksheet, so this is where you'll be doing the work. So let me show you an example of what we've done. So this is a router in one of our test beds. So the router is, that's the name of the device, then the location of the device, then the OS version and the specific version. Then we listed down the features that it needs to support in IPv6. Manual address configuration, BGP, because we do BGP for IPv4, OSPF, and the rest. Then you also say if that feature is mandatory or optional. Mandatory should be something that you're doing currently, must be supported. Then optional, this will be nice to have or something that's as an add-on. Then once you specify whether the support is mandatory option, you need to check whether it's supported or not. So after researching, remember you'll be using the various platforms I've mentioned to check. So does the device support IPv6 or not? And then the conclusion, do you need an upgrade or software upgrade, hardware, or IPv6 is not possible on that device? Then the notes will just be able to give you guidance on things like the ports that are available, the image name, and the memory available on that device. So let me do a quick example. So using the same version, of course, you need to go to, you need to log in into the device, show the version that the device is running. In Cisco, that will be, if you're using Cisco, show version, for example, to list the version of the OS version that's running. After showing the version, you need to go to the feature navigator. So in this example, I'm just doing Cisco. So from the feature navigator, I'll come to, for the router that I have here with this iOS version, 15.3 M5. When you come to the Cisco feature navigator, you have various options. You can browse by switching, routing, and actually something worth mentioning before I forget, they are revamping this. So I think it's still work in progress. But basically, for my OS version, I'll just come to legacy because it reached end of life. And then I'll come to release. So they did some modifications over here. And then I'll choose the release. Scroll down, 15.3 M. Then the exact version, for example, that. Then the platform, if you have the specific platform, then the license version. So actually in this, it will force you to download. You're going to download a spreadsheet. It's going to compile all the information and a spreadsheet will be downloaded. So as it's doing that, remember that I'm doing an actual audit, right? So I'm here in the audit worksheet. I'll say the device name, router 1, for example. What's the type? It's a router. Where is the location of that device? I'll say internet edge. What's the OS? iOS. Then the version, we say it was 15.3. Then I'll come here and list the features. This will be dependent on what you're running. So I'll say I need BGP support. I also need OSPF v3 if I'm running OSPF on that device. We'll also say the device needs manual configuration. Then let's say, for example, we need support for prefix lists. Then because I know these are the features that I currently run, this will be mandatory. If by doing my research and these features are not supported, it means that the device is not IPv6 ready. So going back to the feature navigator. So let me just show you the file which was downloaded, then we can look at it. Yeah, so I have the file. It was hidden down here. So this is based on, let me zoom so that you can see. So remember it is based on the iOS version that I currently have on my device. And then I'll just come here to supported features and all the features will be listed. So let me search for IPv6 and you can be able to see the relevant IPv6 features, policy-based routing, QoS, switching, multicast, FHRP, firewall, HTTPS, TCLs, IPv6 dual stack. So this device can support IPv6 dual stack. Then once you do that, once you get the feature, you'll come back to your audit assistant, to the audit assistant, and say whether that feature is supported or not. If it's supported, the conclusion is this device is IPv6 ready and you can move on with your IPv6 deployment. So basically we need all the mandatory features to be IPv6 ready for us to move on. If you realize that there's a feature that is not supported, then it means that the device is not IPv6 ready. So finally, let me just show you the feature navigator. Since they are modifying it, they are improving it. If I come here to browse and then features, then IPv6. So let's say if I select the BGP IPv6 feature, and then browse, it's going to show me the relevant images and platforms that support this feature. So this is another way of looking at it. But we realize that they've made some changes to it, so it's still work in progress. But in the future, you can use this to do sort of like a reverse search. Start with the feature, and then you'll know which platforms are supported. Might be even much faster. In Junos, as a quick example, so if you look at Junos OS, you can look at the features based on operating system or the platform, right? So based on the software release or by product. If I look at, for example, routing, and I have the MX series, let's say MX 480, for example, then you'll be able to select the supported OS releases. Let me look at the latest one, and then all the features will be listed over here. But I found this to be tedious because you have to either search or you can download a summary in Excel somewhere on our right where my cursor is. But scrolling down can be quite tedious unless you start finding in the page. So it's better to download it and then you can use it to find the relevant features. So download the file. If you are using Junos, get the spreadsheet, download the results, and then do the search from Excel. Alternatively, maybe finally, you can, in Junos, you can just search for IPv6 as a feature. And then let's say, for example, BGP for IPv6. If I click on this, it's going to show me all the platforms that support this feature. And then the relevant OS releases that support the features. The good thing with this, it will also tell you whether you need a separate software license. So you can be able to have all that information. So that's the Audit Assistant. I'll be sharing this with you and you can use it to simplify your audits. So unless there's any questions. Stefan, any questions?
No questions so far, so we'll be taking questions right now. So if you have any question, we are open.
And I hope everything was, please let me know. I forgot to, I usually ask at each stage if everything is clear. If something was not clear, kindly ask so that we don't leave the webinar with clouds in our head. So kindly ask and I'll recap.
Okay, so if you have any questions to clarify, if there is anything you learned, please type in the chat. If there is anything you learned, anything you found interesting, type in the chat. If you have any question, please go to the Q&A. And by the way, Bashir, thank you very much for the clarity. It was very good. Yeah. So any question in the Q&A? Any comment, anything you learned, share in the chat. So first question, all good thanks? No, that's not a question, guys. Yeah. So are you aware of a feature Navigator for Nokia routers? Willy Manga, any idea? Okay.
I
So far,
understand
no.
we just have the specification sheet and a little bit like Junos.
Okay. Yeah, so Nokia is a little bit like Junos. So if you, but this is feature. So so Bashir, that's something you need to take and home with you and do some research and let us know. So how would our responses to your surveys assist Afrinic? Well, it will assist us in so we'll ask you questions on various aspects of this webinar, like the topic. Do you have topics that you will suggest for us to cover in next webinars? You will have to evaluate the presenter. You have to evaluate the content. So we might, update the content, see if there are things that we do well that we need to keep and things that we need to improve on. You'll have to tell us in the survey.
So Stefan,
yeah,
okay.
Bashir.
I can see in the chat someone was asking what type of hardware upgrade could we do? So one of the hardware upgrades you can do, you can upgrade the RAM. You can also upgrade line cards. And it's important when you're auditing. I think I didn't mention it. It's good you've mentioned it. Normally when you audit, we also ensure that as you're auditing, you take note of the resource utilization. That's memory and CPU utilization, because this will be useful once you enable IPv6 and you notice that the memory utilization is abnormal, you're going to take remedial actions. So as one of the things that we do is to ensure that you specify the resource utilization. Normally you'll find it under feature. Yeah. So we'll have 3 months average, but depending on how you collect the resource information, and then memory utilization. Any other question?
Okay, so look in the Q&A. What is the recommended audit schedule? Annually, after 6 months, or over time, you expand your IT ecosystem? So for the audit, this audit that Bashir presented here is the audit for, for budgeting for your IPv6 deployment. So this is generally done. It should be done at the beginning of the project. But for the infra, like for your network audit, it is recommended you do it every 3 or 6 months, because when you do your network, when you plan and execute and execute your network, you don't know, people might add devices, softwares, and things like that. So you need to always be auditing to make sure that everything is up to date, so that you know exactly what is in your network. So it's something that you need to do on a regular basis. 3 months is good, 6 months also works.
So also to add on to that, when you're deploying IPv6, how we approach it, because we don't want to have excuses for deployment. So let's say, for example, if you have an access control device that does not support IPv6, will that prevent you from moving on? So normally how we approach it is we do it systematically. If you want to advertise because auditing can be overwhelming up sometimes. So if you want to advertise your IPv6 prefix, so what we're going to do is we'll audit the devices at the internet edge. And then initially, our goal is usually to get IPv6 to a test VLAN. So once you audit the device at the internet edge, you'll audit a device in the core, not all the devices. So you just do it systematically, and it makes it very easy to at least get IPv6 into a part of your network. once you want to scale your deployment, that's when you do like a full scale audit, which will now act as an input for various things like budgets, etc.
Yeah. So next question is, hello, I would like to know, in addition to strong audit information in Excel, are there any applications or tools we can use? So Willie, any tool to suggest?
To do it, it depends on what you want to achieve. Because there are several tools, but at the same time, we don't want to confuse you.
Yeah. So if you want to do a thorough audit, just use the sheet that we shared with you. And it also depends on your network. So you will use these tools, the Excel sheet that we shared, and you can see there are already some inbuilt formulas to determine exactly at the end what's your audit report that you can use, and so for the next steps. So also depending on the device, you see many vendors. Each vendor will try to provide a feature navigator that you can use to audit your network.
Yes, and if I can just add something, Stefan.
Yeah.
It's like you just told, yes, there are some vendors which are more professional than others. So you notice that they can also have some tools which can do a kind of audit for you or inspect the features and give you, based on the feature, and they give you a short documentation on what you can do with your current hardware.
Yeah, thank you. Another question from Chris Ockham. He says, future webinar, is it possible to have a future webinar aimed at managers? They need to understand the importance of deploying IPv6. In other words, why must an organization deploy IPv6? What are the benefits, and what's the risk? Yeah, so it's very challenging for engineers to convince their managers to do IPv6, because managers speak a different language, and engineers speak another language. So we had a webinar on IPv6 project plan deployment, IPv6 project plan, deployment project plan. So really, maybe we should share the link here, and people can share with their managers. We have some reasons there, and yeah, we can always have this, but we'll advise engineers to use so the audit which we are presenting here, and the project plan. When you have your project plan, it's easy for you to present to the manager what is the necessity of having IPv6 in your network. Bashir, anything to add on that?
Nothing to add. I believe we are okay.
Yes.
Let's look at more questions.
Yeah. So is there any supplementary advice specifications for university infra, particularly for end users? Okay, so if your university is not yet part of our help desk, Manga Willie, please share the link. For specific organizations, you might want to join our help desk. In the help desk, we will assist you. We'll have a dedicated engineer working one-on-one with your organization, and we'll take your deployment plan from scratch to the end, step by step, gradually, and very, very easy steps. So use the link on screen. Any organization, if you want to do your IPv6 deployment and you feel like you're challenged, please go to bit.ly/6deploy ENOFR for the Francophones that are on the call today. Yeah. So are all the address providers globally where Afrinic and us are at this moment? Bashi, Willie?
So I guess the question is whether other RIRs are doing such webinars, if I'm getting it correctly. So if that's what I understand, yeah, I know of Epnic, they do some webinars, and also RIPE do some events. I'm not sure about the others, but maybe you can check on their websites. And yeah, so just check on their website. You'll be able to get all the info. I'm only sure of Epnic and RIPE. So for the others, just check on the website.
Yeah, and also really paste the link for the e-learning. All right, the e-learning is there already. So if you want some other trainings, some other IPv6 material on IPv6, like IPv6 routing, IPv6 configuration, NDP, address planning, go to our website, elearning.afrinic.net. Yeah, you have some modules there, some training modules there, elearning.afrinic.net. Okay, cool.
Good.
Cool. We are good. And one last thing for the roads. One last thing for the roads. Everyone on this webinar, we would like to give you a bonus. A bonus. So we have this very cool program called the IPv6 certification, 36. And because of this period where everyone is locked down, we are providing some discounts. So we'll give you a discount of 40%. So if you want to write our IPv6 certification, just go to our website, to the certification website, register, use the code CERT60, and you will have a 40% discount. So the registration website is 36.io/register. Okay, yeah, really, thank you. I'm very slow at typing. So 36.io/register, use the code CERT60, and you'll have 40% discount just to encourage you to learn during this period. And that's a certification exam, one of the best in the world, with the IPv6 forum logo. So thank you. I'll give back the floor to Bashir to conclude because we have no more questions. And yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. So thank you everyone for joining us. And if there's anything that you'll take away from this webinar, is the fact that you need to always verify device support. Don't trust what your vendor says. So always check. I know some of us were asking, is there like, us as engineers, we are normally lazy, right? Is there a tool I can just click and it shows me everything? Yes, it will show you everything, whether it supports or not, but you still need to go the extra mile of verifying the support. So use the tools that we have. I'll be sharing this before the end of the day today. And if you have any challenge, whether it's not limited to just auditing, we started with address planning, we started with if you want to get your prefix. So if you have any challenge, remember to use the link to request for support. So thank you guys. And I'd like to thank Stefan, Willie, and every one of us for joining us in this webinar. Have a nice evening, afternoon, or morning. Bye-bye.
Very, very, very bye-bye.
Battery 80%. Connected to Galaxy Tab S6.